All right. With those preliminaries accomplished, we will begin our program with Judge Lance Cansino, a citizen.
Yes, thank you. Let me pass these around. This is a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today. There'll be more details in there than what I will cover with you today. But, I just want to put a disclaimer out again. As a justice of the peace, I am certainly aware of the fact that I have voluntarily given up some of my freedom to campaign and speak, but I haven't given up all of my freedom. And the fact that we have to maintain a judicial temperance and a judicial ambivalence in some cases does not mean that that this covers areas outside of my judicial surveillance. So I wanted to just mention that briefly. I will be speaking to you as a private citizen, and so please do not take anything that I say as coming from a judge. It's not. It's coming from a private citizen. I'm going to talk today about money, all of our favorite subjects, right?
Right.
Money is mentioned more times in Scripture, in Christian Scripture, than anything like love or anything else. Interestingly, far more than heaven and hell. That's right. It's the reason for that, of course, is because money is the crucial lifeblood of any economy, whether capitalist, communist, socialist, what strain, fascist. Money is absolutely crucial, a key invention of mankind that has allowed us to communicate with each other and to build economies. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. To give you just a little background on myself, before I was Justice of the Peace, which I just took office at age 61, so this is my at least fourth career. I grew up, finished high school here in Lubbock, Texas, and graduated in 1976, went to Texas Tech, earned degrees in chemistry majored in chemistry with minors in math and biology. And the reason for the biology was my father is a physician. He was at Texas Tech. He worked with Kathy Chauncey. And he, of course, wanted me to follow in his footsteps and become a physician. And I actually seriously considered that, was actually accepted to med school, made some med school student happy because I turned it down, and so he got in instead of me. And I went on in a chemistry and chemical engineering career, and that was my first big career change after working all through school towards medicine, then changing to chemistry and to industry. And then when the oil crashed in the 82, 83, 84 timeframe, I was kind of washed out of that, and I went into financial services for 35 years. And then after the crisis, the economic crisis in 08, I decided to get out of that business, and I kind of shuffled around at various things for about 10 years before taking the Justice of the Peace position. And so that's a little background on where I'm coming from. My interests growing up was always, I was the science and math geek, but I could never get away from economics, from history, and of course, my dad pushing me always towards biology. And so I could never really decide what I was going to end up doing. But for some reason in my life and in my 35-year career in investments and tax planning, certainly I always came back to the economic side. And so what I'll be presenting today is what I've accumulated in knowledge over the last 50 years. I was also a political geek. I began at age 11 really following politics with a passion. Read everything that I could possibly read, and of course that was the Nixon era. And so while I was all excited about the Apollo program and going to the moon and all the science geeky stuff, I couldn't help but be constantly drawn to the political side all the time. And I couldn't help but notice that our country was constantly sliding to the socialist side continuously, and that it had been for 100 years. Just reading a little bit of history, even as a sixth grader, it was apparent to me that this was occurring. And as I went through the early 70s, following the Nixon scandals, following the economic chaos of going off the gold standard, of wage and price controls, of course the Vietnam War era, the whole mess of government convinced me more and more to move far more libertarian. I began to be very concerned about the conservative Republican because they weren't making any headway, they weren't making any progress, and I began to notice some inconsistencies. One of the major inconsistencies that I began to notice was about money. And that, of course, was what occurred when in 1971 we went off the gold standard and went to wage price controls under Nixon. Nixon was an interesting political character. He was elected by conservatives. He campaigned as a conservative, but he, of course, ruled, or his administration was far from conservative. We can thank him for things like aid to dependent children, for OSHA, for EPA, and for a host of other acronyms that were added by Nixon after FDR, Truman, and LBJ had laid the groundwork for all of the myriad of ridiculous government programs that we have and the massive, massive amount of government spending. But we have to go way back for a lot further than that, even to the founding of our country, to actually understand how we got to where we are today. And so this is what I'm going to be talking about today: money, the economy, and the Constitution. So let's take a quick look at this. First question we have to ask is, what is money? Anybody know the answer to that? Anybody take an economics course and get some semblance of an answer?
Generally accepted the medium of exchange.
Okay. That's the first thing you learn in Economics 101, and they're probably one of the few truths that you learn in Economics 101 taught at Texas Tech or any other university around the United States. A lot of times you get truth, but it's so mixed up and so confused you can't really sort it all out. This is a true statement. Money is a medium of exchange. It is something that evolved in human endeavor out of barter, okay? And it has made our economy, an advanced economy, possible. What else does money do?
Lance, it's a non-product medium of exchange because it doesn't involve the product as compared to trading or bartering.
That's true. It is a measure of value.
It's not a bag of corn, it's not a dozen eggs, it's not a slab of bacon.
Actually, that's partially true, and I'll explain in just a moment. For example, in the prison system, what is traded as currency in the prison system? Cigarettes, tobacco, any commodity. Let's put it that way.
That's bartering.
It is barter, but it uses it as a medium of exchange.
Right, but it's not money.
It is money in a limited sense, only in a limited sense, and we'll discuss this in a lot of detail as we go through this. It doesn't. What you're indicating is the problem with this second point, measure of value. It's tough with cigarettes, tobacco, cotton, any other oil, any other commodity that's used as a commodity. It's tough to measure value with that. It's very limited. That is why over time, two metals have become money over the millennia, and that is, of course, gold and silver. Platinum, other metals have not taken this. Copper certainly has taken on that, but gold and silver have become preeminent over time in this because of the second one, the measure of value, and the third one, a store of value. Those are the three definitions that are given to us in Economics 101, and those are three accurate definitions. So we have to have a medium of exchange to avoid the whole barter problem. How do you trade a cow for a house? How many cows equal a house? Well, money allows us to measure that value and to store that value because it's kind of hard to store cows. That's, can be a difficult situation. So let's look at the Constitution and money. What does the Constitution say about money? Well, it's all in Article 1 and Section 8. In Article 1, Section 8, Item 2, the first thing that's mentioned, the second item mentioned in Section 8, is that Congress shall have power to borrow money on the credit of the United States. Okay, so the Constitution unfortunately gave Congress the power to borrow money. Item 5 in Section 8 said Congress shall have power to coin money, regulate the value thereof and of foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures. That is the crux of monetary policy, the way it should be in a constitutional. Notice what I put on there is exactly the way it was written in the Constitution. You'll notice the capitals and you'll notice what isn't capitalized in that statement. The Congress shall have power is capitalized to coin. Notice coin there is a small cap. Money, regulate the value is a capital, and a foreign coin, notice that coin is capitalized, and fix the standard of weights and measures. So when we go through this, let's analyze this a little bit. Congress shall have the power to coin. Coin is a verb in that case. The foreign coin down there where it's capitalized is a noun. Notice that nouns have been capitalized by the founding fathers here. Power, value, coin, and standard of weights and measures are all nouns and they're all capitalized. And there's a specific reason for that. Congress shall have the power to coin, that is, they can make new coins, and that is what we need to consider. Coins were money. And that was all that was really considered to be money. And so going back to Dr. May's point, early on in American history, tobacco and other commodities were traded as money, and they were used for essentially barter exchanges. They were not very good as money. They didn't work very well that way. But gold and silver always, over the millennia, have replaced all other commodities. Always. There has never been a time when either a fiat currency, which I'll explain in a moment, or another type of currency ever could stand up to gold and silver. Gold and silver have always, over time, replaced these currencies. Now, fiat, a word that I mentioned here, fiat is a Latin phrase which means on authority of, which means simply that if I were to say, I'm going to give this paper for my meal today, that would be on fiat. Unfortunately, I have no fiat authority. I don't have the ability to force anyone to take this piece of paper in return for a meal. However, if I was king, I would have that authority. And I could indeed say this has that authority to do that. And it would work up to a point, up for a time. It isn't really money, and so it will only work imperfectly and only for a short period of time. And that's why kings get beheaded and so forth. The Congress shall have power to coin money. Money is, of course, capitalized, and that was an indication, obviously, of the understanding at the time that money was gold or silver. Regulate the value thereof. Now we get into a problem. Remember the First Amendment? A well-regulated militia is a problematic phrase in the First Amendment to explain to people, isn't it? Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia in the Second Amendment is difficult to explain. Because the word regulate has been changed. The definition of it has been changed. Like so many words today, the definitions have changed. Regulate, back in 1787, meant a very different thing from what we think of it today. Today we think of regulation as a government agency overseeing something, like the banking regulations, the restaurant regulations, the gasoline regulations, on and on, okay? To regulate actually meant, in 1787, something very different. It meant to actually have the proper purpose. A well-regulated militia meant a well-trained militia. That a well-trained militia, the people who knew how to fire, who knew how to aim, who knew how to hit the right targets, would be critical in any war endeavor. Well, in this case, regulating the value thereof, regulating the value of the money meant what follows, and that is fix the standard of weights and measures. Notice those are capitalized. The government was given the authority to set the standard. Your scale can't tell me that when I buy a pound of potatoes that I'm actually getting 9/10 of a pound of potatoes.
Right.
It's against the law. And that's what the standards of weight and measures is about. And that was actually meant that gold you would not be able to clip coins, you would not be able to clip copper coins, to clip silver coins, clip gold coins, reduce the value thereof, and profit from that through theft. That is theft. And so that fixing the standard of weights and measures, that's why that's in there, of course. Most weights and measures are not controlled by the federal government. Most of them are actually controlled by the state government. For example, when we pump a gallon of gasoline out of our out of the pumps into our fuel tanks, that is regulated by our state regulatory agencies and those weights and measures at the restaurants, etc. All of these things most things are regulated at the state level. The primary responsibility for standards of weights and measures was revolving around securities and money for the United States, for the federal government. And so we see that. The sixth item is the only other item mentioned in the Constitution about money, and it says this: the Congress shall have power to provide for the punishment of counterfeiting the securities and current coin, and that's capitalized coin, which means actual coins, of the United States. That's what the Constitution says about money. That's all the Constitution says about money. And it's very clear that money was, exactly as Dr. May said, gold and silver, copper also, but very, very little else. Since that time, of course, how many of you remember silver dimes and quarters? Pre-63. Do you have a bag of those? Hopefully everybody has a bag of those. Because that's real money. When you have dimes and quarters today, those sandwich coins, they aren't real money. They are clipped coins. They are watered down with nickel and other base metals that are not as valuable as the actual silver coin. Our inflation rate over the years has been high. Do you realize that back in 1900, you could have bought the meal that most of you ate today for about a dime?
Yep.
One dime would have bought that. The value of our currency has fallen since 1900 over 35-fold. It's worth about 3 cents today. A dollar is worth about 3 cents compared to 1900. Something occurred in 1900, because if we go back 100 years and look at 1800, we'll see something very different. I'll take a look at that in just a moment. What is inflation? It's a hidden tax. What else is inflation? Theft. A hidden tax by definition is fraud, isn't it? And therefore theft. And that's what fraud is theft. What causes inflation? Anybody know what causes inflation?
Printing money.
Two types of inflation. This is an important point here. to understand inflation and not to get confused, as so many conservatives have gotten confused over the years. Price inflation, that's the price you're paying for food. And you know that 5 years ago you paid less for the food that's in front of you than you did today. 20 years ago you paid a lot less. 50 years ago a whole lot less. 100 years ago 35 times less.
But
Then.
let me insert something. Back in 1900, when this cost a dime, the average person was making 50 cents a day.
Yeah.
So the relative cost of this meal has actually gone down considerably.
No doubt, and that's what I'm going to talk about next.
Good.
Price inflation is a change in costs measured in money. That isn't the real definition of inflation. The most basic definition of inflation is monetary inflation, the change in the amount of money. Now let me explain what May alluded to, and that is this. The prices that we pay for things vary over time based on a lot of different factors, supply and demand being the major ones. What increases the supply? Productivity. Since 1900, has not the productivity of all workers around the world increased dramatically because of capital, because of the machines that we have that we didn't have back then? Productivity has dropped the costs dramatically. When we had real money from 1800 to 1900, gold and silver, we saw that costs in 1800 compared to 1900 were half. A bushel of wheat in 1900 cost half what it had cost in 1800. 100 years, we saw a doubling of productivity. This was the first century in human history where we had seen anything like that. That was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and we were well into it by 1900. That increase in productivity brought us an enormous amount of prosperity. Lifespan in 1800 compared to 1900 was half. The advances that occurred because of productivity produced dramatic changes. What we can relate to today is we know that there's been massive inflation, don't we? Because we see it in our meal prices, don't we? What about this? Laptops. Does anybody remember the first laptop they bought?
How about the first calculator?
Yeah.
My first calculator in 1975 cost $250. Texas Instruments SR50. It could do a few things more than just multiply, add, and subtract, but not very many more. It could do a few trig functions and things like that. But it was $250, and that was when money was worth a lot more than it is today. Probably would have been worth $1,500 in today's dollars.
Just a comparison, in about 1970, plus or minus 2 years, a Ford Mustang was on the order of, between 3,000 to 3,500. Those calculators, those TIs were around for engineering, the scientific calculator, like 350.
Yeah.
Your 10 calculators equals a car.
Yeah.
Once you bartered,
That's right.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So productivity has brought a lot of costs down. We see it in the electronics industry.
Yes.
That is counted as bringing the overall rate of inflation down because we've seen tremendous productivity advances. So when you consider what I'm talking about here, when we talk about just prices alone, that doesn't tell you the whole story of inflation. You can actually have a level price amount and actually still have inflation, have the printing of money because of productivity reducing costs. Okay? So that is a critical point. We have been through the last 10 years since the financial crisis of 08, beginning in 08. We've been through a period of, we're told, relatively low inflation. It's higher than the government figures, but it's still relatively low compared to what we saw in, say, the 1970s. But that isn't all good news. We know that massive amounts of money have been printed, right, over the last 10 years. Burley brought me this, and I guess in the 08 time frame, it was around $16 trillion that was added in the money supply during the 08 crisis due to the bailouts and such. And since then, and nothing has changed. That's still continuing. It's just growing today. The numbers are staggering. We're probably in real debt the $22 trillion of the federal debt is just the tip of the iceberg, not even a tip of it, actually. It's probably well over $250 trillion of actual debt that's out there.
That's correct.
Mark?
Yeah, and when you look at what you say, like the value of a dollar and everything, what would 22 trillion be in real money? In other words, that's in paper
Well, divided by 35.
divided by 35?
Yeah.
And that would,
But that's price inflation.
right,
Divided by probably more like 50 or 60
yeah.
because productivity has offset some of that. So,
Right, 'cause that number, it just escapes people. You know what I mean? And it's like it's insurmountable. And,
yeah, it is. So what causes price inflation? Well, an increase in the amount of money in circulation causes price inflation. Does it always cause price inflation? No, as I mentioned. If you were printing 3% more money every year and your productivity was going up 3% a year, you wouldn't notice price inflation. You would still have inflation and you would still have the effects of inflation that I'll explain later, but you wouldn't see it. And so there's a lot of things that are unseen, okay, that we're going to look at. That's what causes price inflation. Now let's talk about something that is the boogeyman word today, right? Deflation. I mean, who wants to hear about deflation? Well, do you realize that from 1800 to 1900, and especially from 1865 to 1900, we had massive deflation. And we had a massive increase in the standard of living, a massive increase in our prosperity. So deflation is not an automatic bad thing. Deflation is actually a good thing. What causes deflation? A decrease in the amount of money in circulation can cause deflation. But gold and silver don't really decrease in amount, do they? I mean, we don't lose gold and silver. Because they're precious, we keep them, right? And so 99% of all the gold or silver that has ever been mined is still in existence today. That's one beauty. That's why it is real money, is because it doesn't degrade like wheat, like cotton, like oil, like any other commodity, tobacco, etc. Okay? It doesn't, and especially gold has been the premier because it doesn't even tarnish like silver does. Okay? So that you can see why, you're beginning to see why these metals have been the premier source of money or function of money over all this millennium. So a decrease in the amount of money in circulation doesn't happen when you have gold and silver as the base. When does it happen? When you have fiat money. Fiat money is money under government authority created by our Federal Reserve, created by a central bank, and money that is credit-based, that is created by a banking system using fractional reserving. Then you can have, indeed, decreases in circulation. What else causes deflation? Well, we just talked about it earlier. Or an increase in productivity of the economy. That causes good deflation. If I lose a gold coin somewhere, I cause deflation. That's not a good thing. But if the price of this laptop, my first laptop in 1994, cost $4,300. Can you imagine that? You know, well over $9,000 today, probably $12,000 or $13,000 equivalent today. And, and this one costs $400, okay? And that is, this one does so much more than what that 25-year-old one did. An increase in productivity is what has raised all of our standards of living and what brings about true deflation. So if we were actually seeing costs drop like they did in 2 centuries ago, in 1800 to 1900 era, we would see dramatic improvements in our lifestyle. What are we seeing today? Are we seeing dramatic improvements in our lifestyle today? With all the technical advancements that we have, we're seeing some, no doubt. But we aren't seeing progress made like we did from 1800 to 1900, or even from 1900 to, say, 1950. We're not seeing anything like that. If you have children, you're worried about, will their standard of living equal our standard of living, aren't you? And there's a reason for that, and it's related to this entire money issue. We can't get around that. So we've looked at that. So who or what should determine the amount of money in circulation? Any answers to that? Who or what? should determine the amount of money in circulation.
Who determines it or what? I'm sorry, should.
Who should? It's a question.
Okay.
It's a question.
I have the what, I don't have the who. Go
Okay.
ahead.
No, I was trying to determine, because there were two different answers, I think.
Yeah, well, I said who or what, you know.
Oh, okay.
Who, what, when, where, you know.
Okay.
Should someone determine it, or should something determine it?
Oh, I see.
Okay. What would your answer be, Stan?
I would say the supply of real wealth in the, real wealth.
Yeah.
See, and that's a distinction, you can tell from Dr. May starting on this thing, how we talk about money versus wealth. Because, you know, when you want to talk about cigarettes or whatever, the barter type thing, wealth really is the primary thing. Money is an abstraction.
In a
What
sense,
you use it represent as wealth. But
in a
the thing is,
sense,
the supply is, Ben Franklin was the one who's on this, is one of the problems with the the Revolutionary War. Was the fact is that England was trying to, you know, monkey with that and mess, you know, do what you're gonna talk about the Federal Reserve.
right,
They
right.
were doing that before, and then, but it's the amount, it was that our money in circulation was commensurate in the value that it represented of the real goods and services that really existed. And when you start monkeying with that, like printing more money and this, well, the value has to come down.
Right, right, absolutely.
Supply and demand.
Here's I think the best answer that we can come up with in who or what. It's my old story. It's a story that comes from Murray Rothbard. Actually, it comes from Ludwig von Mises. It's an old story, and it's the Angel Clarence story. You might subtitle it, "Is It a Wonderful Life?" Okay? This story will illustrate, and I'm going to go through it step by step because this is crucial. If every person who went to Tech and was required to take an economics course, which is most students at Tech, will be required at some point in their career to take an economics course, had this simple illustration in their mind before they went into class, they could tie their professor or their economics professor up in knots because they could not get away with the fallacies that are oftentimes presented in their Keynesian economics classes, okay, with this same story. Clarence, of course, comes from the movie It's a Wonderful Life. And I use Clarence because he's not a real angel, he's a fictional angel. Clarence was a bumbling angel in It's a Wonderful Life, and he made the mistake, a couple of mistakes with Jimmy Stewart in that movie. And he was trying to get his wings, and he finally did something right and got his wings in that movie. And so that's why I use this fictional example, to not demean a real angel like Gabriel or Michael or any of the real ones. So this fictional angel, Clarence, has good intentions. He is an angel, okay? He's not a fallen angel. He's just a bumbling angel. He really wants to help people. And so he comes up with a brilliant idea. Angels should not think for themselves. I think that's certainly scriptural, okay? But he thinks for himself, and he decides that there's a shortage of money in the world, and everyone would be so much better off if we could just increase the amount of money that people had. Then they could buy things, then it would improve our life so much. And so Clarence decides that one night he will simply double the amount of money that everyone has in the world. So whatever you have in your wallet right now, it's doubled. Whatever you have in your bank account, it's doubled. Whatever value that you have that you consider money, okay, Clarence was going to double that overnight. And he felt that this would produce a tremendous benefit to all of mankind. And the beauty of it is it's equal. Every person got an equal doubling, right? Well, what's the problem with that? What occurs when you suddenly double the amount of money?
No real wealth.
No, nothing else changed, did it?
That's Clarence Cline.
The number of gallons of gasoline, the number of bushels of wheat, the number of trees, etc. None of that increased, did it? But the amount of money that's available to purchase those things did increase all of a sudden. And so what is the natural impact of that? It begins to raise prices, okay? So we can see, but let's consider what happens a little bit further. Is it equal? Let's say that I'm a very conservative person and that I like to consider investing and I like to consider what I'm going to do with my money. And so when I suddenly wake up tomorrow morning with twice as much money as I had before, I think about what I'm going to use that for and try to consider I've got to invest this wisely and use it wisely. On the other hand, someone else is a very profligate spender and sees the money, and what is the first thing they go do? They go buy the first thing that was on their mind, right?
Back in circulation.
And they get full advantage of all of that extra money.
In my defense, it looked really good on me.
So you're a clothes person, right? You're not a car person?
Right.
You know,
Well,
for me, it would be,
it wasn't
for me, it
that
would be a car or a plane.
Yeah, a little more money, I would have gotten the Aston Martin.
Have to more than double it then, right? Yeah. 35 times, maybe that would do it for us, you know?
Not that bad.
That's been the theory. That's been the theory of printing more money, is somehow this is going to increase wealth and stimulate the economy. We hear this all the time. Stimulate the economy. We've got to have so much inflation. Isn't that what we hear all the time? Well, let's consider this. We see what happens. The profligate person benefits instantly because they get the full value of that doubling of the currency before prices go up. The guy who waits and is considerate and who wants to go and actually invest it somewhere and make it be useful loses out, because by the time he actually goes to invest it, guess what? Prices have already risen. There's the hidden tax problem, okay? But here's another problem. What do you think, if we just doubled the money supply in America, what do you think most people would spend their money on? What items? You know, it's a list of items. It wouldn't be a single item, would it? It would be a variety of items, but it would be consumer items for the most part. It would be cigars, wine, cars, those kind of things, right? Right, Carl?
Yes.
Horses. There's
Have a trailer.
some key consumer items that would shoot and would probably more than double in price because demand would be so high all of a sudden for those. And so the price level of those items would far overshoot, interestingly enough. So the overall price level would double over a period of time. We don't know how long. Tell me how long it would take for the price level to double. Not too long, but a few days, a few weeks, a few months, and the price levels would be double. But some items would be way out of whack. And we would have people who would go into the car business because of the high demand for cars, or go into the wine business because of the great demand for wine that was created by this artificial stimulation. Then what happens when the money supply doesn't double again after that? A lot of those producers who invested money in producing more wine, more cars, more consumer items go bankrupt eventually. Why? Because there wasn't any real demand. Nothing actually changed. There wasn't any real stimulation. It's like taking drugs. It's like getting a stimulant from cocaine or from amphetamines, from meth. It doesn't really make you Superman, does it?
Lance, the danger has been, there was a debate between the college Republicans and the university Democrats. I'm still very annoyed about what happened there. And the university, one of the questions was a minimum living wage.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that is.
None of us can do that.
Neither do that.
We'll have the right to make zero already,
Right,
so, which is a number.
right.
But the college Republicans, I'm still annoyed, agreed with the Democrats that there should be a minimum living wage. I was fuming.
College Republicans did.
I think some of you others were there too. But it was very annoyed. But what would happen? So they're saying that everyone should get a minimum of I don't know what the argument is, $1,000 a month or something. Every citizen should get a minimum. What do you think the result of that would be actually? That every rent in town would just go up
Yeah.
$1,000?
Yeah.
Right.
Why are college tuitions ridiculous? Do you know how much I spent a semester at Tech in the 70s? $200 a semester. $300 was my total bill with even the expensive, ridiculous textbooks they required me to buy.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I had $1,000 a year national merit scholarship. I mean, that covered everything and gave me a little spending money too. And you know, it was ridiculous how much prices have gone up. What has caused that to go up? Government loans, right? taking this printed money and shoving it off for places.
University administrators.
That's where it all went to.
No, that's why the prices went up.
Yeah, that's where it all went to.
You look at their new administration.
Sure. But how can they afford that? How can they afford that? Because the government was shoveling money at them in massive amounts, and where does it go? It doesn't go to the students, it goes to, like you said, overpriced.
And lazy professors.
That's right.
Mainly lazy professors.
Where do 53% of all salaries at LISD go to? Do they go to teachers? No, they go to administrators. How many administrators are there compared to teachers?
More.
2 or 3.
Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous, right? Mark?
I think a real quick, example, in other words, one we can see it happens like immediately. I work for the state, okay? We get a raise, right away the insurance went up. Okay, you have to raise. And then just recently, Social Security went up, but guess what? So did Medicare.
Well, and here's the problem with inflation. When do you get that raise? You get it after prices have already gone up.
Right.
Who gets the benefit of inflation that our government does? The government, number one,
Mm-hmm.
and government contractors, number two.
Right.
And government contractors, who does that include? That includes a myriad of people today, doesn't it? I mean, it includes college administrators. It certainly includes all of the bureaucrats. It includes people who do contracts with the federal government.
Democrats.
Large number of Democrats, that's for sure, yeah. I mean, it is money that goes to certain people. And didn't we see that when Clarence was so fair about just doubling everybody? But who got the benefit? The profligate person got the benefit, got the biggest benefit. But it's a short-term benefit. Because that car is depreciating, that wine is drunk and gone, etc. And what value is left? No. The person who actually went and put that money and invested it is the person who lost the most, and yet they are the most beneficial to society because their saving is what creates the capital that increases all of our standards of living. Stan?
The point you made is very interesting. I just remembered when I was talking economics. Keynes was the one who said, they said, what about the long term? What about the long term? I said, well,
We're all dead.
We're all dead. Well, the thing is that is an incentive to be profitable.
Yeah.
If you think about it, we'll spend it now. Like you have. I mean,
Congress
that's-
gets elected every 2 years, so
Yeah.
that's why the philosophy.
But I was just thinking about that as he was sharing that. And I just wanted to say that.
Now, this is where I'm going to get into the explanation here. This simple example, if you went into an economics class and you used this example, if you actually studied it and went through and followed it through to its inevitable conclusions, you would eliminate the whole idea of Keynesian stimulus. But Carl, you know what? It's not just college Republicans who've bought into this. It's virtually every congressman or senator in our Republican congressman or senator in our legislatures, in either the federal Congress or our state legislatures, who bought into this also. Why did they buy into it? Because it's easy. Because, it sounds good. It sells, right? I mean, everyone should have a living
They're
wage.
just buying the votes is what they're doing.
Well, that's what they're
I
doing.
think they know it's,
Well, some do.
but it'll last long enough for them to stay, a congressman for 20 years in the environment and all the fun that comes with it.
How many of you have ever heard of Lord Acton? Lord Acton.
You bet.
Lord Acton was a Catholic, an English Catholic. And Lord Acton, of course, gave us the famous aphorism that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And he's absolutely right about that because no man can be trusted with the kind of power that the federal government has.
Right.
Listen to what Trump said about the Federal Reserve while he was running for election, and now listen to what he says.
Okay.
Now, we all basically like Trump for the most part, right? But absolute power corrupts. There's no question about it. There's no way around it. No man can be trusted with that kind of power. The power to print money should not be trusted to any individual. So the question is, from this, who should or what should control the amount of money? The free market always works best for determining the amount of money in circulation. That's how we got gold and silver to begin with. That's why it's replaced all other types of money. It's why we put a lot more value on gold and silver than we do on copper coins, than we do on anything else. Because copper is a commodity that is used for electrical and electronics, etc., right? So it isn't the ideal one like gold and silver that are essentially used only for the purpose of money, for jewelry, that type of thing. But the free market has always determined the amount of money in circulation until man gets involved and starts manipulating that. And that is what we have done with our Federal Reserve. We have violated the Constitution, and started in 1913, that's 107 years ago now, that we violated a basic tenet of our Constitution, and it has had disastrous effects.
Right, and Lance, one thing, in the Constitution, where our founding fathers, when they wrote about commerce, and it's one of those presentations I have on commerce, and I got God's fingerprints in the Constitution, they violate Proverbs 11:1, the false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but just wait, is his delight. So when they start taking and use false balances,
That's right.
and then your economy's gonna go down. The
That
other-
weights and measures, that's what that's talking about in Proverbs, is that
Exactly.
weights and
Where
measures.
Proverbs 16, verse 11, a just weight and balance are the Lord's.
Exactly,
It says all the weights of the bag are his words.
that's right.
So when you start violating that,
That's why it's theft.
exactly,
That's why inflation is theft, that's why coin cutting was theft, that's why the Federal Reserve is involved in, guess what?
yeah.
Theft.
And the other thing, my dad taught me something. We used to collect coins when I was growing up, and he was a student of history. And one of the reasons Rome fell, a gold chalice was really, that was like a status symbol in Rome, and that or silver. Well, the artisans found out that they could take lead and get the same weight and just lay it over it. Like you say, a clip coin, And so they started doing it. Well, then everybody had a gold chalice,
There's lead underneath, but
was-
yeah.
When they would pour the wine in the drink, the alcohol would leach the lead into the wine.
And killed them. Yep.
And, well, it caused them to go crazy.
Yeah,
And it caused women to be infertile.
Yeah.
And so they weren't producing.
killed the Roman Empire, that's right.
It did, because they weren't producing the population to keep their legion strong, so they had to go out and get legion, people from the conquered areas.
That's right.
And that undermined the whole thing.
Those are the unintended consequences. Whenever we do bad things, things we shouldn't, guess what? There's always a lot of unintended consequences we never even thought about.
Right.
Chip?
Yeah, well, you're talking about the Constitution. One thing that was passed very shortly after our Constitution was the Mintage Act. And it was in I think it was 1787.
Right.
And it showed how serious our founders were about having solid money. They specified in that act exactly how much weight of gold or silver should be in each coin. And they provided that the director of the mint, who came up short on producing that amount of gold and silver, would be executed.
Right.
So, counterfeiting was one of the first capital crimes of a federal nature, was execution. So they
It's right
were
there in the
very serious
Constitution,
about keeping
item
this
6.
value of the money solid in terms of real money.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the free market always works best for determining the amount of money in circulation. And of course, as a matter of fact, the free market always works best for every economic question. Can you name an economic question that wouldn't do better? Would we be better off to have a totally private school system than what we have with this mixture of federal spending, state spending, county spending, whatever that we have in our school districts and our Texas Tech and Texas and all of our other state schools? This is a question that we need to consider as constitutionalists. None of this existed when the Constitution was set up. None of these institutions existed. From the beginning, though, just like among Jesus' 12 chosen disciples, there's always a Judas, isn't there? There is always a Judas. Well, in the American constitutional times, who do you think some of the Judases were? We know about Benedict Arnold in the Revolutionary War time, but going up
Woodrow Wilson.
10, 12 years. No, I'm talking about the Constitutionalists. Those are clearly,
Pre-1800.
yeah, pre-1800. Who can name me the primary Judas who had his fingerprints on our Constitution? Hamilton, yeah, Alexander Hamilton. Now, is it any surprise that the big play Hamilton is so popular on Broadway today and that all the Democrats run and go see it all the time? Is that a surprise? Doesn't that automatically tell you that what I'm telling you is true? That Hamilton was the fly in the ointment? Hamilton was a proponent of mercantilism. He was a proponent of high tariffs. He was a proponent of benefit for the merchant class. And he was in favor of money created by banks and lent out to the right people, his cronies. He was, to use a term that we're familiar with today, the original crony capitalist of his time. Okay? And that is where we get so much of the evil. He was a proponent as first Treasury Secretary under George Washington. Now, he was a competent individual, and you must give him credit for the things that he did well. He was extraordinarily competent. But sometimes a competent person who gets a wrong idea in their head can be far more dangerous than a lot of incompetent people. Stan?
This is a question, for about what I've heard. I don't know, I can ask you. Was Hamilton also a Rothschild opportunity?
He was definitely had banking interests coming out of Jamaica where he was born.
I don't know, I've heard
He had-
that, you know.
He was definitely always did in favor of anything having to do with the big bankers. And wanted regulations, remember, not every person who's in business, in fact, most people who are in business are not for the free market, are they? They would rather have regulation. Why? Because it limits their competition. And the big proponents of regulation are oftentimes the big companies. Walmart likes regulation. Exxon likes regulation. It keeps their competitors out and down. Do they do good things for us? A lot of times they do. But would they do better things if they had real competition? Unquestionably. That's what we're talking about with the free market. Crony capitalism, of course, ties up the free market. Mark?
Wasn't Hamilton in favor of a central bank or something?
Yes, he
Yeah,
was.
oh yeah.
He was also in favor of the president being king, essentially, and being elected for life, kind of like Supreme Court justices. He was also in favor of the president serving for life.
Oh, really?
So he was, there are a lot of things about Hamilton that are interesting. And so when you read the Federalist Papers, you must always consider, I much prefer the Anti-Federalist Papers. In fact, if you want to know who were the best prophets, who were the optimists about where our country would go under the Constitution, it was the Federalists. It was John Jay, it was Alexander Hamilton, it was those folks who were all in favor of central government. And they thought that this was wonderful. Obviously, for their class, it was. But the Anti-Federalists predicted exactly, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, folks like that, actually predicted much better what would actually occur. Their prophecies have come much truer than the Federalist prophecies. Go ahead, Mark.
Another thing, a simple, like it's a spiritual principle, it's irrefutable and absolute truth. What you sow, that's what you also reap. And we can see when the cables get in there and they sow, it's like the enemy that came in and sowed tares with a good seed. That's what you're gonna reap. You know, they're gonna come up together.
Right.
And you're gonna have trouble distinguishing wheat and tares, because they look very much alike. And that. So.
Yeah, that's why Hamilton writing, a lot of things that he wrote sound really good.
They do.
But the prophecies didn't come true. It wasn't as rosy as he presented it in the Federalist Papers. And that's a real challenge. I actually believe that we would have been better off to have amended the Articles of Confederation and put in some of the safeguards that were put into the Constitution. We'd have been a lot better off if we'd gone with that rather than throwing it all out and putting in the central government. And of course, that is what we're faced today. The Constitution is essentially a dead letter today. Who really follows it? Does anyone in Washington actually follow it? isn't it amazing that Nadler and Schiff and these guys with the impeachment stuff, what are they shining around right now? The Constitution, right?
Right.
Is it resemble anything like you've read in the Constitution? No.
Violated 6 of the Bill of Rights, or 4 of the Bill of Rights that I know of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, who is taking them down for that, right? Not the media, certainly. So let's consider this, okay? We have a problem. And the problem is this, that there are a lot of conservatives who, like Carl was talking about, have gone along with really bad policies, bad socialist policies like the minimum wage and a living wage and all this garbage. And in money, money is the most critical issue that we can deal with. When I pass that around and it goes into detail, the Angel Clarence example, and takes you through it, and it shows you why do we have recessions? Why do we have booms and recessions? It's because of the printing of money. Now we do it a little bit different, and maybe in the future I'll be able to do another presentation on fractional reserve banking and discuss that. But it really doesn't matter where the money is printed at, whether it's the government just by fiat issues new money or whether it goes through a banking system. It has the same effect. It's more money and it creates all sorts of inequities and problems. What the Angel Clarence example shows is that bad people benefit from inflation, good people lose out from inflation. It's a hidden tax, it's theft, it's fraudulent, and it causes booms and busts. And we have so many Republicans today who want to get reelected, and so they want the economy to be good through the next election. And what does that mean? They want the Federal Reserve to be loose in printing money right now so they can go through the next election. Now, I'll admit, this is how corruptible all of us are, okay? Because I'm going to admit that I'm corruptible on this too. I would like the economy, even if it takes some stimulus, to be awfully good next November for Trump's reelection, right?
Yeah.
Now, don't we all?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You see the temptation? Who can be trusted with that kind of power? No, we need to pay the price and go back to a stable currency.
Well, that was what Bitcoin was trying to do,
Yeah.
but the governments don't let it be generally
No,
acceptable
no.
because they don't like the competition. of
Exactly.
their ability to
What
create-
counterfeiter likes the competition? It's like the gang wars, you know? I mean, if you're counterfeiting money, you don't want anybody else counterfeiting money. You want to be the source of it.
Lance?
Mike?
There was a time when we had counterfeit money and then got rid of it. That was for the Civil War.
Well,
Yeah.
actually,
And it
several
was a
times in our
great
history.
cost when they got rid of the greenbacks that they'd used to finance the Civil War. It was at great cost to the economy.
Actually not. I'll dispute you on that. I have an article on exactly
Well,
that.
let's say
on the
certain
whole
interests
greenback.
within the economy suffered.
Yeah. Why the Greenbackers Are Wrong is a good article by Tom Woods that talks about that very issue. I'm going to talk now about where you can learn more and how you can actually do this. David Stockman. How many of you remember David Stockman? David Stockman was OMB director for Ronald Reagan in the first 4 years, I think, of his administration. He was a budget hawk. He wanted the Congress to actually abide by their agreement with Reagan that if they would put in the tax cuts, that they would put in spending cuts also equal to that. And of course, naturally, the liars in Congress didn't ever intend to abide by that. And that's why we got into the crises later on. The housing crisis, if you remember in '87, the home mortgage crisis that we had then, the buildings and loan crisis that we had. And we need to consider something else too. And I'm going to say here something politically incorrect in a Republican group. You know, not all Republicans are free market. Okay, name names. Yeah, I'm going to name names. I was a Reaganite. Okay. My very first vote at age 18 in May 2nd of 1976 was for Ronald Reagan against Gerald Ford, who was the sitting president. And actually, I like Gerald Ford considerably today in comparison to what we've had since, right? But Reagan was still so much better than Gerald Ford. And in 1980, over, guess who? H.W. Bush. Who succeeded Reagan in '88? And where did the economy go? We had Bill Clinton because we had H.W. Bush.
Yeah.
We had Obama because we had W. Bush, okay?
Yeah.
Name names, I'm sorry. If it gets me unelected, I'm still gonna say it.
Why are you sorry? They were both socialists.
That's right.
You're right, you're right.
Right.
I got a question.
Whatever.
Does not the fact that our dollar is used for international oil trade kind of magnify the impact? We gotta have the money because of the commodity is some value, but that's gonna magnify the waves across our country, is it not?
Well, actually, no, I mean, you're saying that there's a need to print money because of
No, I'm
oil?
just saying that money was printed, it had to be in order for it to be an international trade. If everybody had to use dollars to buy and
Whose
sell.
benefit, to whose benefit of that?
You
To whose benefit
to a
is it?
certain extent.
I'll tell you who benefited from things like that. Individuals like George Soros. Do you know what George Soros, you know what George Soros does to make money?
That's a good.
He's a hedge fund trader, right?
Yes.
What does hedge fund trading mean? It means trading in that's what it means. It means trading in that currency that you were talking about.
Right.
It's crony capitalism, and that's how you become a billionaire in America, is become a crony capitalist. You still have to be good at it. I'm not saying I could be one, even if I wanted to be that corrupt. I doubt that I have the ability to be, to do that. There's still, the cream does rise to the top. It's just that, it's,
The banks are doing it.
No, you're
It's
too
a
honest,
bad-
you're too honest, and Soros will bribe the right politicians,
Yeah.
that's how he made his first $1
Yeah.
billion.
well, and maybe I'm saying I wouldn't go that far, but, Larry?
What if, there's 209 countries in the world, okay, with central banks?
Yeah.
All 209 countries, as of this past weekend, have signed the Paris Agreement to go to the gold standard. What happens if all 209 countries do go to the gold standard?
Well, if they actually did, I would say, that I can't believe that would actually happen. Not until there's a real crisis that hits. But if it were to happen, yeah, we would see a swift recession. Do you know that the recession of 1920 was initially considerably deeper than the stock drop of 1929, and yet from 1929 till 1946, what did we have? A depression. Okay, you can't tell me that World War II got rid of the depression, because how was it that gentlemen going and spending days and weeks getting shot at in foxholes was a higher standard of living than being at home in 1935 during the Great Depression? It wasn't. We didn't see any improvement in American standard of living until 1946, when the war ended. Okay? And the Great Depression really went on for that entire length of time because we violated every principle, every economic principle in the book. And so if we went back to it, yes, we'd have a short, swift recession like we did in 1920 after World War I, and it would be over, and then we would have booming prosperity, real prosperity that would continue. But I don't see that happening.
Well, I think, though, what you're saying is a political thing. I think the way they want to go to the gold standard is have special drawing rights issued by the International Monetary Fund backed by gold, because it's partially backed already. And I think then they could have the International Monetary Fund be the globalist World Bank, that it could expand the money supply as much as it wanted with its fiat currency, the special drawing rights. Saying, well, it's backed by gold, we have, 1/10 ounce of gold behind it, and then a few years later, we have 1/100 of an ounce of gold behind it. A few years
Yeah, in other
later,
words, we just keep
1,000th of an ounce
decreasing.
of gold.
We keep clipping the coins.
Right, essentially, that's
So
what
nothing
they could do it
changes,
that way,
right?
and give it-
Nothing changes, and
Yeah.
that's really the key to understand is people can call free trade when it's when it's a document that thick. That isn't free trade. That's managed trade.
Yeah.
Okay? They can call it the gold standard when it has 1,000,001 fiat rules. It has no relationship. Just because people say something doesn't mean it's true. Just because they tell you they're for free trade or for sound money doesn't mean they really are. In fact, it probably means they're really not, and they're just defrauding you. They're just telling you lies to get you to vote for them.
I think what they're talking about, though, is using other assets in addition to gold as the valuation, land and buried mineral.
But why would you want
That's
it?
the
Why would you
argument.
need to do that? The key, when you consider the angel clearance example, what amount of money is necessary? Whatever amount of money the free market has out there, that's money. You don't need to artificially create more by bringing oil or bringing some other commodity into the mix. That's a way of inflating while supposedly holding some cap on it, okay? So it all comes down to this. Now, let's talk about the free market schools.
It has to be, you've gotta have money to buy and sell those assets somewhere.
And that's not the gold standard either, if you include
It's not,
everything
no, it's not a
besides
gold,
gold.
it's asset.
Let's talk about the free market schools, and let's talk about where you would learn more about this. The classical school of economics, this is, of course, what Adam Smith in 1776, Adam Smith wrote Wealth of Nations, and he essentially encyclopedized the classical school of knowledge up until that time. And that was a true free market basis. But it has developed. It has developed now into the Austrian School of Economics, and this is the school of which I am proud to be associated with. The Austrian School of Economics was a group of Austrians led by Karl von Menger and Ludwig von Mises, who capsulized free market principles and did the best job. Of course, Hayek was a disciple of Ludwig von Mises, and he actually won the Nobel Prize. And so this school has produced the only true free market school in existence. Not the Chicago school. I was going to show you a video of Milton Friedman on this because I like Milton Friedman. 90% of the time I agree with him, but whenever he talks about money, I disagree very sharply. And I'll give you some videos if you're interested to show you how muddled, how clear his thinking is on almost everything else, but when it comes to money, it's like he got drunk and didn't understand it. You know, I don't know why he understood everything else, but couldn't understand money at all. Because the things that he says about money are just, I watch him on YouTube and I'm just scratching my head. Where did this brilliant man get so messed up about it? I mean, it's so obvious when you just simply take it step by step. But that is the Austrian school. So how do you learn about the free market? Learn Austrian economics. Where do you learn Austrian economics? You can go to Mises.org, and the Ludwig von Mises Institute is based out of Auburn, Alabama. And we have a wing of it right here in Lubbock at Texas Tech. It's called the Texas Tech Free Market Institute. Ben Powell, who heads that up, is an Austrian, and he has had Bob Murphy, Tom Woods, and a lot of other Austrians, and has essentially a lot of Austrians on his staff at the Free Market Institute. So we have right here in Lubbock a free market center that we can access, and we need to really, as constitutionalists, we need to be accessing that all the time because they are right on when it comes to economic issues. Where else? You can go to LouRockwell.com. If you want both political and economic information from an Austrian perspective, LouRockwell.com. Lou Rockwell was Ron Paul's original chief of staff. He founded the Mises Institute, and he is a tremendous individual. I've met Lou, spent time with him, and he is a phenomenal individual. One thing that I really appreciate about the von Mises Institute and Lou Rockwell are that these are true Christian men. There is no, remember Jesus' statement when he saw Nathanael? And he said, there's an Israelite in whom there is no guile, in who isn't deceiving. So many people who say they're Christians are deceiving. And we need to be very, very careful. When someone tells me they're a Christian up front, my red flags go up. If they're too much about it up front, you know, when I get to see them and if I hear their testimony and get to know who they really are, I can appreciate that. Yeah. But just to tell me up front, that's a red flag, right? And we really need to, but Lou Rockwell, the Mises Institute, these are true. I've watched them over 35 years and they are truly a credit to Jesus Christ. Tom Woods show. Tom Woods is excellent. New York Times best-selling author. And Tom is excellent. Tom has spoken here at the Free Market Institute. He'll be coming again, I think this next fall, he'll be coming again to speak, and we should all gather up and go and hear him when he does. And Bob Murphy was here at Texas Tech for 5 years. He just recently left Texas Tech, and Bob Murphy is an economist and excellent. And if you want this, you can go to just go to bobmurphyshow.com and tomwoodshow.com, and there is a wealth of information there. Tom Woods advertises that you can get an education while driving to work every day, listening to the podcast, and that's what I do.
Can you make a list of these and give to Mallory so he can send us all
Yeah,
a copy
yeah.
of all these references?
Yeah, I sure will. And then Bob and Tom have a podcast called Contra Krugman. You know who Krugman is? Paul Krugman, New York Times columnist, Harvard economist. Okay, and that should tell you all you need to know, right? Contra Krugman is day by day, every time Krugman publishes a column, dissecting it and showing where the falsehoods and where the problems are, and giving him credit every once in a while when the thing about people who have guile, the thing who pull the wool over your eyes, they don't lie all the time, do they? Mm-hmm. In fact, they tell you the truth a lot of the time, but they slip a lie in there and it undoes every truth that they ever told you. Okay, but you've got to be careful. Not everything that anyone says is a lie. They wouldn't get away with it if everything was a lie. I don't know if you remember, Saturday Night Live, The Liar on there, and everything that he said was a lie. And of course, it was funny because it was so obvious. But it's not that obvious when we encounter people. The reason why they're able to pull the wool over our eyes is because we don't realize how they're slipping in the lie and catching us like that. And then there are people like Milton Friedman, who I do not think was lying, who just were muddled and confused on that one issue. But it is the crucial issue. It's like having a gun and needing to use a gun with no bullets. You can have the finest rifle in the world, the best scope, but without ammunition, it's absolutely useless. And that's where Friedman and so many other conservative Republicans have gotten into trouble, not understanding this issue about money. And that is why I'll close with that right now. I would say this, that folks like David Stockman have written on what an audit of the Federal Reserve could really reveal. You can get this by going to the Lou Rockwell website. Doug Casey, an old hand, some of you probably remember him. He's been a hard money advocate for 40 or 50 years now. I remember reading him in the late 70s. And Doug Casey says about our coming financial crisis, this is going to be one for the record books. He's on record as saying it's going to be much worse than the Great Depression was, and that's because we're in much deeper than we were back then. Then there's articles like Why the Greenbackers Were Wrong, and of course you've got my article, Money and the Economy, there to do that, and I'll be glad to discuss any of this with you and help you to understand it further. The angel clearance example helps you understand the business cycle and how creating money creates our recessions, our depressions, brings all of this on. And once we understand that, as constitutionalists, we now have something to back up what we're saying. It's not just words on a piece of paper in the Constitution about why we should have real money. It's actually something that we can promote with people.